Hi there, Charles Becket. Thanks ever so much for agreeing to spend a bit of time with us today and sharing your perspectives on how the cultural sector is responding to COVID-19. Perhaps some insight from you about what we might think about in order to be our best selves in this current situation. Do you want to start by telling us briefly about your experience and kind of the kind of work that you've been doing in the past, and then jump into some of your thoughts and observations that might be useful for us all.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, Richard. So I'm Charles, and my background is that I worked for about 10 years for Arts Council England, both in the literature department and on the digital and creative media side. Since then, I've worked in Amsterdam for the European Cultural Foundation, which is a private foundation that works with cultural organizations across Europe. And in the last 4 years, I've been working as a freelance consultant, and I've had the chance to work with People Make It Work, both on the Change Creation Programme and on other initiatives. And more recently, I've been working with organizations in Wales, in Holland, and in England, mainly on the development of their strategies, business plans, fundraising, and communications. Right. So, Richard, you've asked me to talk a little bit about some of my thoughts about the art sector and how they're facing this current situation. And there are broadly three areas that I really want to cover in this discussion. First of all, I think I want to talk mainly about, from the kind of human perspective, how this affects us as individuals working, and how we think about the uncertainty and difficulty or anxiety that a crisis like this creates, what we can do to manage that kind of uncertainty. And I think it's very important to think about it critically. First of all, to give ourselves a sense of perspective, to think that this is something which is affecting all of us globally, that it's imposing certain restrictions on us, so that we don't feel as if we have to achieve the impossible, because we are all in this situation together, and there is a wide understanding of the difficulty that it's creating across the sector and across all industries. So first of all, it's important to be realistic about what the situation that we're in. We have to think about our own role within that global situation. What can realistically be our responsibility and our reaction to this current situation? Obviously, it's a situation that requires some rapid decision making because of the urgency, particularly the financial situation. But also, I think for me, it's really critical that we try to maintain the opportunity for strategic thinking during this period, so that we can plan and become more resilient and even stronger as the period goes on, and perhaps as it becomes more normal, and ultimately as we emerge from this period of time. Hopefully that can strengthen our organizations and our sector for any future crises of this type. I think it's very important that we break down some of these very significant challenges into smaller steps and practical actions that we can take, because they can seem completely overwhelming and very poorly defined in a situation of great uncertainty and everything changing. So it's very important that we try to think about things in terms of achievable and practical goals as we go along. I think in terms of starting points, where do we really start to think about coping with this situation from? Obviously, one of the core things that we have to start with is the mission. What really drives us as organizations, as people working in the arts? What is the thing that we're trying to achieve overall? And from there, we can start to expand to think about what we might be able to adapt and realistically deliver to our audiences and our community, and how to do it. But also, it's very important that we think about our changed, the situation that our audiences find themselves in, like ourselves, and how their changed patterns of engagement, attention, and consumption might be during this period of lockdown and quarantine. So what we can do to continue to engage with them in this situation. It's analogous for me to the shift from the real world exhibitions and displays to the kind of digital world, and the way that audience behavior and attention changes. And there's some very good work on that subject by a guy called Matt Block of Story Things. Lots of organizations are already experimenting with more agile ways of working, with prototyping and experimenting with small scale actions and work that they can put online. Mm-hmm. And particularly, I mean, from my background in the literature world, I've seen a number of smaller organizations and individual artists doing this quite successfully recently. So poets, for instance, like Luke Wright, who did have a tour of live performances, but has been continuing those performances online through his social media presence. Or Ross Sutherland, another poet who has a very successful podcast series, maintaining his work and his contact with his audience, even though we're all in lockdown. Some other examples of organizations who are doing work, just to pick a couple, Spread the Word, maintaining writing workshops online, as well as the Arvon Foundation, who are offering tutorials for writers online. And on a different scale, Liverpool Philharmonic, who are offering concerts available through Facebook Live. So there's a range of organizations and artists adapting to the situation by finding ways to deliver their work or engage with their audiences through their online presence. But I think I would go beyond that and say, you know, this is an opportunity for us to experiment and adapt, because in a situation of this nature, there are, you know, it's only realistic to expect a certain amount of production, given the restrictions that we face, and also for a smaller, more experimental work during a period of time like this crisis, the cost of, as it were, failure, which might be significant, more significant at other times, might be slightly reduced in the perspective of a global pandemic. As I've said, I think that it's very important during this time for us to think about the role of arts organizations and the place of arts organizations in their community. Yeah. And I was reading a very interesting blog by a community artist and writer, Francois Matarasso, the other day about the idea of generosity and how important that is, both in terms of an arts organization's generosity to the community in which it's based and its wider community of supporters, but also the reciprocal generosity that people might show to the arts sector, and the importance and value that arts work has for people at a time like this when they're locked indoors for so many weeks at a time. And people sort of really returning to the arts and culture as a means of refreshment and inspiration and well-being during this period of quarantine. So, for instance, a couple of examples which I've seen recently, the Literary Consultancy, which is an organization which gives writers editorial feedback on their work. They've set up a little inspiration page on their website. It's only a small thing, but it really shows how they're thinking about their community and the well-being and inspiration of writers. Spread the Word, the Literature Development Agency, has a social media campaign called Say Your Piece, which is, again, an attempt to connect with the community and allow them to express feelings about the current lockdown and the situation that we find ourselves in. Other organizations are taking an approach where they're being inspired to create commissions or off commissions and create work particularly based on this situation. So for instance, Heart of Glass have a commission series called Homework, of micro commissions where artists can work inspired by the situation that they find themselves in. Watershed is doing a series of online lunchtime talks, which are short webcasts that people can tune into and get inspiration over lunchtime. And then many organizations, as I say, are looking for that reciprocal generosity, and it's an opportunity to call on support from audiences and communities. And there's an emphasis on donations and calling for some support from audiences. I think that obviously the messaging around this kind of call is really important, especially at a time when there are so many priorities for giving. But there are some good examples around there in the arts sector. So online community building is also another important part of the communication during this period, and maintaining the link with communities and audiences. The Poetry Society's Young Poets Network is a good example of this, getting young poets to recommend reading for audiences via social media. And the RSC's Your Shakespeare social media campaign is another way of maintaining contact and activity and engagement with audiences despite the lockdown. And I think in general terms, it's really important to think about how to maintain the thread of communication with audiences, how to acknowledge the situation organizations are in and the challenges they face, but at the same time giving a sense of continuity and a sense of future development, even as we face the challenges imposed by the current situation. And so finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the role that I think an organization like People Make It Work can play during this period as well. Because we've seen and we're receiving a great deal of information, institutional and official information from funders and government, maybe on the one hand, and on the other hand, from individual artists who are finding their own ways. And in some ways it's easier, I think, for individuals during this period who don't have perhaps the same fixed overheads and costs to distribute their work online. But in the middle, the arts organizations and leaders of those organizations are facing some of the most significant challenges, really. And although there may be financial support through various channels or official support, what it seems to me has been lacking in some ways is advisory and a kind of pastoral support, which I think that a community like People Make It Work is really well placed to offer. There's a range of expertise, and I know Richard and your team are putting a great deal of free material and resources on the website. And I think that that reflects many of the things that we've been talking about, the kind of generosity of that offer. But I feel that there is a real need there for, particularly for leaders in the arts, facing some of these very difficult questions about how to navigate their way through this period of time, how to maintain that strategic thought about the future, how to spot the opportunities for them, and how to maintain contact with their audiences, while at the same time facing the kind of day-to-day decisions about financing and operations. And I think reassurance that you're getting those kind of decisions right by talking to not just to peers, but also to people with a lot of experience in these areas is where I think someone like People Make It Work can make a real difference. And I'm very glad, if I can, to be able to contribute to that offer. So thank you very much for watching. Thanks for listening. And I hope that some of the thoughts that I've offered will help you during this period of time.
Thank you ever so much, Charles. It's been brilliant to hear you walk us through those three areas of thinking about how we preserve our strategic focus and keep protecting that time, how we think, how we keep coming back to our mission, our audiences, our communities when we're thinking about setting priorities right now, thinking about how we nurture our digital relationships and perhaps think about appropriate versions of our work that might be possible online, and then thinking about how we support ourselves as leaders to feel able to make the best decisions, feel equipped, feel confident and clear, and recognize the universal experience. You know, we're all novices at leading at this time. Hopefully we feel like wise novices who can bring our experience into the present, but we're still, you know, doing that with very, very little knowledge of where the future is going to be or exactly what's around the corner. It's been brilliant to spend a bit of time with you. Thank you ever so much, Charles, for giving us your insights, and see you again really soon. Thank you.